the F1 Focus Podcast with MV Velman and Hendrik Vervoort.
Welcome back to Formula One Focus. A bit of a boring race for everyone except if you're a McLaren fan. So, Hendrik, which one of the two are you in?
Well, I've said it. There's no such thing as a boring Grand Prix, and it's not as if I fell asleep. But surely, and this is a big point of debate. If we had a little bit more rain, or if the rain at the end of the race, or the spitting drops that came about right, I think at the final lap or something, if that came a bit earlier and threw something in the mix, then we would have certainly had a far more discussion-able race. But as it is, there was a decision to not start the race at the scheduled time and to wait for 80 minutes or something before they got the race going again. And we can talk about that. There were some really good performances. I mean, Oscar Piastri's victory was a classic victory with a lot of pressure. Lewis Hamilton, I thought also shone. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me that he got the driver of the day. So yeah, I think quite a few things to talk about.
Yeah, let's start with the first thing that you mentioned, the race being delayed by 80 minutes. And all the cars, or many of the cars, were set up for wet conditions, including Max with a huge rear wing and the likes. He was adamant that he wanted to go racing, same as Lewis Hamilton behind the safety car. He felt they were ready to go racing. But there seems to be a trend in Formula One to move away from racing when it's not particularly dry, almost, or if it's too wet, whatever. Yeah. And it's not an issue of grip so much as an issue of visibility, especially with the history of this Spa-Francorchamps track, where quite a few fatal incidents have happened in the past. You can't afford to go through a route unsighted, like George Russell called it, being blindfolded. And I think that's probably the reason why they didn't go ahead with the race at the scheduled time.
I think so. And as you said, it's all about visibility. We remember at Silverstone, where it was wet as well, they had the safety car, and then they called the safety car in. And then immediately after that, Isaac Hadjar banged into the back of Antonelli at Cops Corner because simply he couldn't see him. He just went flat out into the back of him. He simply could not see the car. So I think that is something that they wanted to avoid. And it's, as you say, all because of the visibility. And the majority of the drivers behind the safety car, that initial, when they got away at 3 o'clock behind the safety car, those initial couple of laps, I think it was, 3 or 4 laps that they did behind the safety car. Most of the drivers, with the possible exception of Verstappen and Hamilton, said that the visibility was terrible. Even Lando Norris, who was in pole position, said that the visibility behind the safety car was terrible, and that's at slow speed, at the safety car speed. And that he said, I can't imagine what it must be like further back. And the whole thing about this is that, these days, people can say, but in the past we had wet races. Think back to 1998 when Damon Hill won that crashed through race at Belgium, and there were many occasions since then when they did race in the wet. But let's not forget that we have the current generation of Formula One cars, the so-called ground effect cars, have a much bigger effect on the amount of spray that is thrown up behind the car than in the past. In the past, it was the spray thrown up by the tires, so it wasn't as bad as we have at the moment. These cars are designed that the Venturi channels underneath the car suck the car down, and therefore it speeds the air up underneath, and then the air then passes at the back through the diffuser. And the diffuser is designed in such a way, particularly designed to throw up the air over the car behind in an effort to make the car behind pass or get closer to the car that it's racing. In the past, the dirty air was sort of on the same level as the car behind, and that had a huge negative effect on the ability of cars to follow each other. But now with these cars, the air is thrown up high above the car behind them, and that's the whole idea. The cars are designed such. But of course, the downside of that is in the wet, that air that's thrown so high becomes water, or water, droplets. And they tend to hang, especially at Spa. We'll get to the particular circuit at Spa. So, the problem is not the amount of water that the tires can displace. So, you say, let's get better wet weather tires. It's not the problem. The problem is the air that throws up the water through the diffuser. So, next year we'll have much less of ground effect, only downforce basically, and that could well, signal a different situation, and we could well see, not the same problem. And as you mentioned, the Spa-Francorchamps circuit is particularly dangerous in this sort of situation. And you've also mentioned we had 2 fatal crashes in junior series for the last few years. The Formula 2 driver, Anthony Hubert, in 2019, and David van het Hof in Formula 3, I think it was, in 2023. And both of them, basically, what happened is that in the wet, they lost control at the top of Eau Rouge, in other words, Radillon, at the top of that hill, hit the barriers on the outside and bounced back across the track, and were T-boned by cars following them that could not see them in those conditions. And, that's the last thing, of course, that we want to see. And I would not blame anybody to say, I'm not going to take that chance. I'm the race director. I'm not going to take a chance of that happening in a Formula One race. So I think altogether, I don't think it was a mistake for them. What they possibly could have done was to start the race earlier. Not the 3 o'clock start, the 20 past 4 start, because I think it was pretty clear at that point that the track was that the rain had stopped, and that the conditions wouldn't be as bad as they were earlier on. And what they possibly could have done is started the race a little bit earlier, and ran it a little bit longer in wet conditions. As you say, a lot of the drivers had cars set up for a wet race. They expected a wet race. They didn't expect one that started wet and ended. And the majority of it, I think 70% of the race, was run in dry conditions. But then again, what do you do with weather? You do not know what is going to happen. Nobody can accurately predict the weather exact to the minute what is going to happen. So, it's unique to that area, the Ardennes area, or the Ardennes forest area. It's a hilly area. It's lots of forests, and it has its own microclimate. So, pretty difficult situation, and I think one should acknowledge the race director to rather err on the side of safety and than taking the chance that something horrible can happen. I mean, Fred Vasseur did say after the race that if something did happen, all of us would have jumped on race direction and said that they made a mistake. So rather err on that side. I think, Max Verstappen saying, yeah, we're never going to see wet races again, and, this is the direction. I think that's just silly. Spa is a unique track. It's a unique environment. So I think if it is wet, we are going to see some wet races. I cannot foresee anything being as bad as what we saw this weekend.
Well, they tried a couple of solutions, and that was focused on the tires. They had ran those splash guards, whatever.
Mud guards or whatever,
yeah. Ferrari actually did it, and there was another test before that, but it didn't help. Because, like you just said, the problem is not the tires so much; it's the venturi causing that, all those droplets to be suspended in the air. So that does make a difference. I'm just interested why, if they had that much time to wait for the race to start, they were in pit lane. Why didn't they just allow the cars to change the setup, knowing that they are now going to start in a dry race? Is that like a regulation, or why did that happen?
It's a technicality, as so many things in Formula One. It's a technicality. The race itself officially never started. They suspended the starting procedure. So that means that, if the race hadn't started, this is on paper, of course it started. They counted down those laps behind the safety car. But, officially it was, the starting procedure was suspended. So therefore the cars still remained in parc fermé conditions. Once the race starts, then the cars are out of parc fermé, and you can theoretically then change whatever you need to change if you want to, out of parc fermé. But while you're in parc fermé, you can't do that, because if you then make changes, apart from changing tires, I think you can. No, I don't think they could change tires in this situation, because it wasn't a mid-race red flag stoppage. If it's a mid-race red flag stoppage, that means that you can make changes and change tires and whatever in the pits under the red flag conditions. But this wasn't that. The starting procedure was simply suspended, and therefore the race had not officially started. So therefore the cars were all still in parc fermé, so therefore they couldn't make any changes. That's the answer.
Interesting. Talking about the race now itself, they, eventually trundled off, and Lando was calling for, not a standing start, a start behind the safety car, because he was a little bit worried. You saw what happened with Oscar, starting pole position in the sprint race. You're not in the ideal side of the track. He wanted a rolling start, Lando now, but yet he still managed to screw it up, and that's now becoming classic Lando. You know,
Unfortunately, screwing it up is maybe a bit harsh, but yes, it was a mistake. He started way too early behind the safety car. When the safety car pulled off, he started so early that Oscar could stay with him.
Yeah, he depleted his power pack.
Yeah, he didn't wait until the main straight. He waited way before the bus stop chicane to start the race, to restart the race, being in pole position. So of course, looking back, had he started later, maybe on the main straight, then he could have caught out Oscar, and then Oscar would not have been able to follow him that closely through La Source and through Eau Rouge, and then got close to him because Piastri was able to stay with him. In fact, he went quicker. He went faster than Norris through Eau Rouge. It was measured, and that gave him the opportunity to slipstream past. Remember that at that point there was no DRS yet. So that's the mistake that Lando made, and arguably that cost him the race. Then he found himself in the position where he had to come up with a different strategy as the race progressed, and he decided that they're going to go for a one-stopper, which wasn't a bad decision anyway. That put the pressure straight back on Oscar Piastri that he needed to nurse his medium shot car, because initially that would have put him on a two-stopper. So he needed to extend that. And that put the pressure on Piastri, and Norris did close. But then, towards the end of the race, he made a couple of mistakes again. He was going absolutely flat out. He was going as hard as he could. And then in the process, he made some mistakes, which cost him arguably about 3 seconds, which would have put him much closer to Oscar on tires, which would have arguably been in a better position or condition, and arguably that could have allowed him the opportunity of trying to retake the lead. So we don't know, obviously, but that's basically what the situation was. And I think Lando also afterwards acknowledged. He said that his teammate did a fantastic race, and he deserved it, and that's just the way it is. So now the points difference between them after the sprint race on Saturday, also the point difference is now not 8 but 16. So I think Lando has got some thinking to do. Hopefully he will not find himself in a position next weekend in Hungary that he was last year when he had to, give up the lead. So,
yeah.
But I mean, these two guys are fighting tooth and nail for the championship, and that's great. That's fantastic for the two of us. Having said that, I think Oscar did a brilliant race. I mean, the pressure that he was under. The first thing that he did was he saw that opportunity that Lando basically handed him. He took that opportunity, and then he managed his lead in the race in a brilliant way, not putting any foot wrong that I could see or anybody else I think could see. Absorbed the pressure and took a well-deserved victory. And he's as cool as a cucumber, as we've said on many occasions. And if the difference between the two of them comes down to who's the coolest at the end of the season, it's certainly going to be Oscar.
The interesting thing about the entire thing that you just described is that McLaren had different strategies for their different cars. It's not a team strategy. This is the hard tire, going on the hard tire was better for Lando, so they went for it, and Oscar had to respond to it. And that's interesting to me. I like that kind of a thing. It's still, a straight up race at the moment.
Well, absolutely. The two garages are racing. There's no question about it.
I like that. I like that a lot. And Lando also said, he made a couple of mistakes, but he's sure Oscar also made a couple. No, he didn't. Oscar didn't make any mistakes. I'm sorry, Lando, but I mean, you now, starting to prove the point here that when the heat is on, you sort of slip up. And, that's going to make the difference whether you're a champion or not. You called it beginning of the year. I say it every time we speak, but you called it Oscar's going to be the champion, and it's looking more and more likely that it's going to probably be him because he's mentally stronger.
Oscar needed to hit back. I mean, Lando came off 2 race wins, and Oscar was not happy about the whole situation and things that happened at Silverstone and in Austria. So he had to, from his point of view, he had to come back. He just had to find a way of coming back, even though he was leading the title chase, by, as I said, 8 points going into this race. He hadn't won for the last 2 races, and he was soundly defeated in those 2 races, and he had to hit back, and that is exactly what he did. Which I think shows, the mark of a potential champion.
Yeah, well, let's say he was soundly defeated in Silverstone. I mean, he made that mistake of the safety car where he braked too much and he got a penalty.
Well, Yeah,
and he was
and he was
leading the
very
race.
unhappy.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, he wasn't beaten on track so much as he was beaten by that penalty, I think.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, it upset him a little bit. Now,
Yeah.
let's talk about Max. Helmut Marko somewhere announces I think, Austrian outlet that Max is going to stay next year. At last, I think that's now probably put that to bed. Max seems to be happy with Laurent Mekies. That seems to be things that seem to calm down. From everything that I've read, is that the tension is palpably less in the Red Bull garage. Apparently, what are you hearing from about that? The tension.
No, absolutely. That seems to be the case. And as you say, Helmut Marko has gone on record. He spoke to a German website saying that Max will drive for them in 2026. So that you can take that as much as a confirmation as you can want, and the thinking, the speculation has been for a long time that Max had the exit clause in his contract that should he be outside the top three by the summer break, which means after the Hungarian Grand Prix next weekend, if he's lower than third, then he has the right to leave the team and to find pastures greener. But now, he's leading the man in fourth position, George Russell, by 28 points. And even if Russell wins the race and Max doesn't score any points in Hungary next weekend, there's only 25 up for grabs. So he will still be leading George by 3 points. So that basically means that situation is not in play anymore, and that Max cannot use that escape clause should he want to leave. I think I've also said for quite a while now, I cannot see him actually leaving Red Bull for next year for various reasons, and we don't need to revisit all those reasons. It was always, I think, quite clear. No, it wasn't quite clear, but I think it was always quite logical for him not to leave Red Bull for next year because of the situation next year, the technical situation and stuff like that. Rather stay where you are, see where you are next year, because nobody's talking yet about where he's going in 2027.
And he's theoretically signed till 2028, yeah?
He is signed till 2028, but there will also be an escape clause for him next year. There will be an escape clause in his contract for every single year that he has the contract. And I think closer to the end of the contract, that escape clause will probably be stricter as the years progress. And there's already speculation that I've seen that next year, the escape clause could well be that if he's not in the top two by the summer break, that he will have the opportunity of leaving the team for 2027.
So it's stricter on Red Bull, not so much on him. It's actually more lenient on him. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. Well, if they don't provide him the car that he can be competitive with, that he can have the potential to win in and challenge for the championship, and this is the theory. So by the break, by exactly the same time this year. Next year than this year, if he's not inside the top two, he can choose to go, and that would be probably in a situation where Red Bull is not amongst the front runners, at least amongst the top three, in terms of the new engine performance and the new aerodynamics and everything that comes in next year. So that would be an opportunity for him to leave. Well, now you can ask, of course, what about George Russell, the one that he was supposedly, whose seat he was supposedly chasing at Mercedes. So George now seems to be in a safer situation. And Toto Wolff is already saying that George will be able to sleep well over the summer break. So I think that's a good enough signal that they're going to sign him. But are they going to sign him for 2026 only? That's the question. Because let's not forget that he would probably want to have a longer term contract with Mercedes, because I think he will believe that Mercedes is going to be competitive next year. But on the other hand, of course, if they're not competitive next year and they only sign him for a year, that leaves him also free to leave. If Mercedes is not where he would like them to be next year. So it's going to be very interesting to see the length of the contract that George is going to be signed for. If it's multi-year, then I think it's an indication that he feels that the car is going to be competitive next year with a new dispensation. If it's a single year, because Mercedes would want to keep their options open if Max comes available, just like we have at this point. If they want to keep that option open, then they'll sign him for 1 year, and then he will have to decide: do I want to stay just for 1 year and leave my options open for 2027? So, that's going to be very interesting.
Well, the other side of that coin is it might not necessarily be Russell that, might leave. Antonelli seems to be on a bit of a downward slope here, and he's getting very emotional, showing signs that he's actually still a teenager. And that
Yeah.
maybe it's, it was a bit too soon, to put him into a Mercedes. There's talk about him maybe going to Alpine and sort of taking the pressure off a little bit, until he sort of matures a little bit. Isn't that a possibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's remember the situation that Mercedes found themselves in. They found themselves in a situation where Lewis Hamilton said, "I'm going," and then Mercedes basically needed to find somebody that can take his place. They obviously had a look at Carlos Sainz at that point, and that didn't work out for them. So they basically, well, they could have, brought Valtteri Bottas back in again for this year. But I think, because Antonelli is a member of the junior program, he's a member of the Mercedes family, and he's shown very, very good talent and racing ability in junior categories. I mean, everybody in Formula One sees him as Max Verstappen type 1 of a generation talent. The problem is he's still very young. He's 18 years old. And he's in a front running team. Look, Max had the same situation, and he was, I think, 17 or something like that he was 17 when he signed for Red Bull. It's a similar situation. Max seemed to be able to handle that, and Max was never really part of the Red Bull family. It was only in Formula 2, I think, that they brought him in. But Kimi obviously is a different kind of personality. He's got different abilities to absorb pressure or not. I see Lewis Hamilton put his arm around the shoulder of the youngster this weekend at Spa, saying, "Look, bad weekends happen. You just need to sort it out." And in a separate interview, Lewis said that he cannot understand how these youngsters can cope at this age of 18. When he joined Mercedes from Formula 2, he was something like 22 or something like that. And he found it difficult. He said he found it very difficult then to be in a front-running team at that age. He cannot imagine now, he said, what it must feel like if you're only 18 years old. So, those are the things that one has to take into account. And I think if Mercedes sees enough in him, I think they would understand why he's not performing. I can't necessarily, put the finger on it. I'm not inside the team. But I think they do understand and they do give him support. And I do think that they see him as a longer-term prospect. And you must also then say, if they let him go, or if they take Max and replace Kimi with Max, where's Kimi going to go? Is he going to go to a different team and become a serious competitor, at a different team? Mercedes would probably like to hold on to him in the longer run. So, the talk has not really been about Max replacing Kimi. It's been about him replacing George. So
Yeah, well, you're talking about bad weekends, and you're talking about Lewis Hamilton. He didn't have a particularly good weekend right to the race itself. And then he shot the lights out. He did quite well. That new Ferrari, it's not fantastic, but at least Charles Leclerc ended on the podium, and Lewis ended 7th from where did he start? 19th or something?
Well, he started in pit lane, didn't he? So, I mean, if we look at Lewis, just looking at Charles, Charles had 2 third places this weekend in the sprint and the Grand Prix. So clearly, the car's working, or he's able to be right up there, although the performance difference to the 2 McLarens is still too large to their, for their taste. And obviously, if you're half a second off the pace, doesn't matter if your car is a little bit better, you're still not going to challenge for a win. But anyway, Leclerc had 2 third places. And Lewis, if you look at his qualifying on Saturday, the lap that was deleted for track limits was absolutely on it. He was right there. And he would have qualified probably right there with Shaw. He would have been right up there on top. Because the millimeter or 2 that he was outside of the white line at the top of Radio simply did not make that much of a difference. To qualifying to qualify him substantially lower. But eventually, obviously, his 16th place on the grid wouldn't have worked for them, so they decided to change the car a little bit. In Park Fermé, that meant that he had to start from pit lane, and the whole thing worked out for him until he had a higher he had a higher downforce rear wing, so he was able to go through sector 2 much quicker than he would otherwise have been. Maybe gave away some top speed, but anyway, so he was able to come up to 7th position. I mean, from the back of the grid. So that is not back of the grid, from the pit lane. but okay. So one has to also take into account that it was a rolling start. So they were at the back of the grid, the pit lane guys behind the safety car. But anyway, so he made up 13 positions, got the driver of the day. I think deserved well, and also something that somebody pointed out. When he spun in qualifying for the sprint on Friday, when he had his time at that point was well up again. And then, the rear wheels locked when he hit the brakes for the bus stop chicane. And the reason for that is a combination of the new braking materials that they brought in for him. Charles has been driving with that for quite a while, but he hasn't seen that for this weekend, Lewis. And combined with the engine braking of Ferrari, that he has been complaining about, which is so different from what it was like at Mercedes. Those two factors basically caught him out. He admitted to that, and he said it was his mistake, the spin. But had he not spun, he would have qualified much higher for the sprint race, and conceivably could have finished much higher than, where was it, 13th or something in the sprint race. Oh. So I think, on the face of it, it wasn't a good weekend. And Lewis did say afterwards, yeah, it was a weekend to forget. But, there is signs of progress. There are signs of improvement for Hamilton particularly. Let's not forget, of course, for the last few races, apart from last weekend, he outqualified Charles. I think he outqualified him for the previous 3 races out of 4. So, he's getting there. And anybody who's thinking that he's going to just, retire at the end of the year, I think they're mistaken.
Looking at this weekend now, it's a doubleheader. Hungaroring looks like it's going to be a McLaren heaven, utopia, made for McLaren. So once again, it's going to be a question of which one of the 2 drivers is going to take the title or take the win. Interesting track, that sort of a street circuit without walls, some people call it. I'm looking forward to that. But of course, then after that, it's the the summer holiday that feels like it's never going to end. But I'm wondering whether Mercedes can do any catch, because they were particularly poor this weekend. And George Russell, even though he's not signed a contract, he wasn't very happy with them either.
Yeah. I mean, they also had a bit of a nightmare weekend. But Mercedes clearly has taken a step in the wrong direction. And George said after the race that he thinks it's all going back to Spain. When you remember when the teams had to change their front wings, he thinks when they changed the front wing on the Mercedes, that's when they started to have more problems. If at the beginning of the season, Mercedes was right there. In the right conditions, yes. They didn't work all that well in hot conditions, but at the beginning of the season, there were not that many races that were in hot conditions. But he says, I think that is probably correct, that they've taken. I can't tell you what the step is that they've taken, but clearly they've taken a step in the wrong direction, and there's been some serious meetings going on at Mercedes this week to try and pinpoint the problem and possible solutions. Because I think what is also important for them, that they should not go in a wrong direction aerodynamically, because next year the aerodynamics are also going to play a huge role in the performance of the car. So if they go in the wrong direction now, that means that they must make sure that they don't copy that into next year's designs.
That's interesting.
So they need to know what the problem is. They need to know quite early, because you need a long lead time to work on the aerodynamic designs for next year. You've got movable front wings, movable rear wings, and all kinds of different aerodynamics than this year.
That's interesting, because everybody thought McLaren was going to get knocked back by that technical directive in Spain. And so McLaren is still far ahead, further ahead anybody. Red Bull seems to be catching up a little bit slowly, but still. And then you get to know that this weekend as well, got the new floor and everything, and qualified quite close to Max on a long circuit, like you just said. I think it was 3/10 of a shorter circuit. We might have been closer. But the point is, he can actually perform, looks like, and maybe with the support of Lauren Mekies now that knows him from his Racing Bull days, maybe it's not the end of the road for him just yet.
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario that Yuki would lose his drive before the end of the season. That would just be ridiculous, wouldn't it?
Well, it's the Red Bull, you never know.
But I don't think so. I think they do understand why he is not where he should be, and he knows why he's not comfortable in the car, and they know that they need to make him comfortable in the car. Clearly, the floor that they gave him this last weekend, which is the same one that Max has been driving for the last few races, to know crashed his car heavily, remember, at Imola. So therefore, they had to take the time to build the new floor for him as well. So this was the first opportunity for him to use that, and it showed. He qualified well. He qualified, as you say, 3/10 off Max in Saturday qualifying, and that could well have been much less on a different circuit. But then they made a tactical error, a strategic error in the tire strategy during the race, and he was inside the points, and then they called him in at the wrong time, and he lost 3 or 4 places, so he was outside of the points again. But I think the trajectory does seem to go a little bit upwards for Yuki, and I think the sooner they can get him to score points, the sooner they will see a huge improvement in his performance, because it's all about how comfortable you are in the car, and how much you trust the car. Looking at the Hungaroring, it's a circuit where top speed doesn't make a difference at all, is not a big factor. So I think Red Bull will be much more competitive because they don't need to run, low downforce rings. Most cars will run high down, if not, well, all of them will run high downforce wings because of the point that they don't need, a low downforce. There's no low downforce portion of the circuit. Can I not get these descriptions right? You don't need a high top speed at the Hungaroring. So I think the competitive the cars will be much closer competitively, and I think we will see strong performances. Yes, obviously by McLaren and from Red Bull and from Ferrari as well. I think they are slowly but surely starting to close in on the front runners there.
We just heard news yesterday about Turkey now putting their hands up with proper government support again to get back on the calendar, and actually as soon as next year maybe to stand in if something goes wrong. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. We have all these countries. Last week I think I mentioned Nigeria also putting their name in a hat. Nothing has come from that, and I don't think that's a serious effort at all. And we of course know in South Africa we are hoping to get a Grand Prix back. There's all kinds of procedures going on at the moment behind the scenes to try and get a bid together in order to submit that again to Formula One. And we know that Thailand is a strong and credible competitor in this field. They've got a lot of the process already completed. They've got the support of the government. They've put together a bid for $1.2 billion. If you work it out in rand terms, that's way beyond 20 million rand. And that's government money, taxpayers' money. So they put that aside already. And now this week, on Monday, Turkey has come out and made a statement. In fact, it was, I think, a press conference by the CEO of the guys. Now, I'm not going to say his name because it's extremely difficult to say his name, but they came out and announced that they are going to look at the possibility of getting back onto the Formula One calendar. They've got a ready-made circuit, of course, and the circuit that we saw being used in 20 and 21 during COVID. They on short notice they were able to step in and able to run races there. So that's it's not a question of getting the circuit ready. The circuit is there. They've just got different ownership now. They dropped off the calendar originally because of money, for money reasons. Now they've announced they've got full government support for it. The government of Turkey wants it to happen, that the Grand Prix comes back to them. So that seems to be another serious contender in this field, along with Thailand. So I think the pressure gets ramped up every time that somebody who has got a package together and can afford to do it will be able to at least throw their name in the hat.
Right, Hendrik, thank you. I'm looking forward to this Hungaroring one. Like you said, McLaren very strong, especially, I said, apparently between 140 and 200 for that sort of middle range, and that's exactly the kind of circuit that this is for. But McLaren's good at any circuit, and that's what makes this car so good this year. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to you next week.
The F1 Focus Podcast with Envia Velman and Hendrik Vervoort.